Pelosi on the House GOP blocking Ukraine aid, they've greatly diminished America's reputation in the world. Wow, that is so funny. Let's go ahead and roll this video clip. Por favor, Mr. Hansen.
But it's about Donald Trump allowing Mike Johnson to bring it to the floor. And all of this activity about vacating the chair is springing from Donald Trump.
Right.
So he's a puppeteer, and he doesn't mind shining the light on the strings. So he makes these people look bad. But why is it that he is so pro-Putin? I keep saying all roads lead to Putin when it comes to Trump. But this is deadly serious in the lives of the people who have lost their lives in the weeks and months that we have just delayed all of this. And in terms of our reputation in the world, it is greatly diminished by what is happening in the House of Representatives.
Okay, I'm going to say something, and every once in a while, this a thought comes to mind, and I'm like, Carl, that is brilliant. You know, I'm being facetious here, but this thought did come to mind, and I want you to catch this. So I'm going to say it a couple of times. Are you ready? Our assumption is that Biden wants to defeat Putin, right? He wants to defeat Putin. That's our assumption. That's the media assumption, that Biden wants to defeat Putin. That's wrong. He doesn't want to defeat Putin. I would argue that he's a puppet for Putin, just as Nancy Pelosi said Trump was. Our assumption is Biden wants to defeat Putin. No, Biden wants to defeat Trump. Here's a story from RCP, Real Clear Politics. This is an economist. I don't agree with everything in this column. Let me say this from the forefront. But this guy makes some very important points that I think we have to understand. And I, at this point, believe that this war needs to come to an end. My buddy Christopher Hart calls it Biden's war. He's absolutely right. Biden's war needs to come to an end. It needs to come to an end. We'll get into the Biden demanding a ceasefire from Israel. We'll tie all of this stuff in together. But let me start with Russia, Ukraine. Guys, let me say this from the start. I believe that Putin is evil. I don't care if somebody puts a bullet in his head. I mean that in all sincerity. I believe the guy is going to hell. All right. And I don't say that lightly, because I think hell is going to be horrible. Right. We only live a certain amount of time on this earth and in eternity. It's eternity. All right. So. But Putin is an evil man. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Joe Biden had an opportunity, and NATO had an opportunity to make sure that Putin's aggressions towards Ukraine were halted immediately while Putin camped out on Ukraine's border for months and months on end, and he did nothing. He did nothing. It's almost as if he wanted Putin. He wanted Putin to go into Ukraine. It was weird. You guys remember that, right? We don't talk about that often. Now, let me talk about this economist. How much time do we have, Eric? Okay, let me talk about this economist from Columbia University, gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Sachs. And I'm going to have to go through this column. And callers, I promise I'll get to you. The number to call in, 1-800-655-MIKE, 1-800-655-6453, or go to mikeonline.com. All right, so here's what this economist from Columbia University says. And again, I don't agree with all of this, but he makes some very important points. And again, our assumption is that Biden wants to defeat Putin. He does not. He wants this war to continue. He wants this war to continue, just like he doesn't mind even the Israel and Hamas war being elongated, because he believes in his sick, perverted mind that this helps him in an election. He'd rather people die. He'd rather Israel be totally destroyed than to lose an election. That is the evil that we are dealing with in the White House. Here's what Sachs has to say. You can't make sense of this. It's a zoo. If I am just hearing now, the plan is to illegally seize Russian assets. Well, kiss goodbye to America's role, listen to this, in the international monetary system. I'd never even thought about that. There are limits to what you can do. But I don't think our members of Congress really understand much about this. This is purely money down the drain. If they want to rip up another $61 billion, which is not chump change, they seem intent on doing it, but it will mean nothing except for more destruction of Ukraine. Now, I understand, all right? It doesn't matter where you fall on this issue. What matters is that this war comes to an end because there is no plan and there's no desire for it to come to an end. He was in an interview with the Hill. This economist went on to say, this war has destroyed Ukraine, and the longer it continues, the less there will be of Ukraine. It is that simple. If this goes on longer, Russia will capture more territory. If it goes on long enough, Russia will capture Odessa, Kyiv, if we continue the way we're doing. This is a Biden project that goes back 10 years, he says, will completely destroy Ukraine. The idea that this is siding with, quote unquote, Ukraine is absurd. And again, I understand some of you in the listening audience will agree or disagree with this, but what we should all agree on, it's time to bring this puppy to a close because there is no plan and there is no desire for Biden to win against Putin. He wants to defeat Trump. He doesn't care about defeating Putin. I was speaking to a client of mine the other day. He was like, man, he was like, man, we really have to defeat Putin. And I'm like, the assumption is Biden wants to. He doesn't want to. Anyone who really follows events, the economist says, knows that we're not siding with Ukraine. We have paid for hundreds of thousands, listen to this, of Ukrainians to go to the front lines and die for more and more territory to be lost. The most basic point of this war, which is that we overthrew a government in Ukraine in 2014 that wanted neutrality so we could push NATO enlargement, was reckless, stupid, and doomed to fail. And it failed. Now Biden is trying to hide the failure to get past November. But the failure is seen on the battleground every day. This is not about defeating Putin. This is about defeating Trump. If the Republican plays into this, if Republicans play into this, it is unbelievable. Shame on them, he says. They are basically on the right side, although Biden bludgeons them every day. You'll be the one to lose Ukraine. The truth of the matter is Biden has been a disaster for Ukraine for over a decade. The disaster is there in the graves of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians in lost territory. He should have added Obama to that. This is a war that never should have happened. It was about NATO enlargement. I have some disagreements with this because I don't believe it's entirely this. But anyway, this is what he says. The Russians said no NATO on our borders, and Americans who were following this, like our CIA director, Bill Burns, who was then the U.S. ambassador to Russia in 2008, said, no way, this is crazy. The entire Russian political class is against this. But Biden and Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Victoria Nuland and Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken just barged ahead, wrecked everything, and now they want another $61 billion to get them past November. He says it's a disgrace. I say no, it is evil. See, the assumption is, and honestly, he doesn't go back far enough because there's writings of Putin back in the day. Putin wanted this return to the old, the old Russia, right? He wanted the old time Russia back. And he's not getting that back. But he will be able to defeat Ukraine. It's time to bring this puppy to a close. The assumption is all of these guys really want to help Ukraine. When no, they don't want Putin to... they're not trying to defeat Putin. Again, they're trying to defeat Trump. That's what you have to understand. The war began 10 years ago, he said, when Victoria Nuland not only passed out cookies on the Maiden, but engaged in insurrection to overthrow a government in Ukraine. He says pretty stupid to have a regime change operation on a country with a 2,000-kilometer border with Russia. He says that's our American foreign policy. That's when this war started. This war didn't start in February 2022. It started in February 2014. Remember, it was during Obama's administration that Putin took Crimea. And he says it started with Nuland, Blinken, Sullivan, and Biden, the same characters. The fighting went on for 10 years, and then in December 2021, Putin said, and listen, I don't believe this to be entirely true, but it still is part of the story. Look, stop the NATO enlargement, and we can avoid an escalation, quote unquote. He says, I talked to the White House at that point, and he says, they said, no, we don't stop anything. They just thought they had all the cards. We're going to cut them out of the SWIFT banking system. We're going to bring their economy to its knees. It was a bunch of nonsense by ignorant people, he says. And so Putin escalated. He didn't start the war. He escalated the war. Annoyed within basically a week, Zelensky said, okay, we can be neutral. And guys, remember this. I really think that Biden wanted Zelensky assassinated. I really believe they thought Zelensky was going to be assassinated. Regardless of how you feel about Zelensky, I believe that at some point Zelensky said, these fools don't care if I'm assassinated. They don't care if I killed. So I'm going to milk this puppy for all it's worth. That's what I believe Zelensky is doing.